But let's move over to
Yeah, good call.
Mailchimp and talk about censorship.
Yeah, I didn't think that we would ever be speaking about Mailchimp on this show, but here we go. It appears that Mailchimp is continuing their crackdown on crypto newsletters. Crypto intelligence firm Messari and self-custody wallet Edge have allegedly had their accounts suspended without warning. Messari founder Ryan Selkis tweeted on Wednesday, "Thank you for deplatforming some of crypto's most reputable brands in the past 48 hours. You're proving our point. Mailchimp and all speech censors must be destroyed." Will, I'm going to kick it down to you. Quite a bit to unpack in the story that goes all the way back to 2018. What do you make of this news that came out this morning?
Yeah, so I saw this circulating yesterday at first, and there's a history with Mailchimp, right? There's actually a history with a lot of these service providers that don't have an interest in currying favor with the crypto crowd, and for good reason right now, right? There's been a lot of scams and hacks and whatnot, and they wanted to distance themselves from it. At the same time, we were looking at a firm like Messari, which has a huge newsletter subscription, Decrypt, a well-known media group within the crypto space, and then some other ones were involved as well, like some DAO projects, some NFT projects, that all those were deplatformed from Mailchimp yesterday. You start looking at it and be like, okay, there needs to be a fine line, and there needs to be like internal policies at these Web2 places for what they're going to be able to service and what they're not going to be able to service. And the fact that they even lost the ability to pull their subscription list from these websites, like that's devastating, right? That can shut down an entire business. Imagine writing just a newsletter that's like your occupation. Maybe you get like a little money from it and that's what you call a job. Boom, like you've lost it, all of it, because you don't have access to your subscription list. And typically you can move somewhere else, right? You can go to a different platform very easily and just move your email list over. That's not happening right now. So it's definitely unacceptable and frustrating. I assume this will get fixed fairly quickly, but you never know. Adam, to you.
I mean, there's a lot of liability, just from a reputational standpoint that comes into kind of making these decisions. But the thing for me that this emphasizes is, again, in a Web 2.0 world, we solved a lot of decentralization challenges from the Web 1.0 world by centralizing, into these service-focused companies. And these service-focused companies tended to be at the very early part of their life cycle where they were growing very, very fast, and they were sort of the disruptive face of technology. They were very supportive of disruptive use cases, and they were willing to take kind of risks. And what you see over time is that as technology companies grow, and as they become sort of systemically important to the internet, as they become sort of integrated into the fabric sort of our lives, then the sort of competitive drive that pushed them to make really great products kind of falls away, because, hey, if they lose, 15% of their business, well, that's probably okay with them if it means that they get some other advantages down the road. So this all feeds into sort of one big challenge around how do you do competitive services in a world where people come to rely on certain realities that we just expect, but which are not actually guaranteed because they're run by companies, which are run by people. So when you're talking about these types of things, it's a difficult situation. It is a business decision for them to make. But again, I think it really makes the argument for why something like Web3, which aims to take a lot of the sort of advantages of Web2, but to reinsert the decentralization into it, at least such that you have the same rights as anybody else, and that the rules are applied at a programmatic level, at a code level, rather than on a, hey, we decided we don't like those guys level. And I think that's really one of the big problems we have with the world today. And it's one thing that I do hope that Web3 eventually solves.
I want to point out to a 2018 tweet from Mailchimp. They said, cryptocurrency related information isn't necessarily prohibited. It can be sent as long as the sender isn't involved in the production, sale, exchange, storage, or marketing of cryptocurrencies. This feels like it was written by one of the US regulators. Such broad terms that really can embody any aspect of the industry. I mean, this could embody CoinDesk. If CoinDesk used Mailchimp for a newsletter, I think CoinDesk could fall under one of those categories. And so I just think having more defined definitions when we're creating rules like this that we can then apply and point to when we're deplatforming people, because when we look at who is deplatformed, Messari, Edge, Decrypt, they used the service for a while, and then all of a sudden they didn't have access anymore, and they didn't have access to their email list. And I think that's the important kind of facet here. But Adam, I'll throw it back to you.
Yeah, so this is a little bit tangential, but it's relevant to sort of what you're talking about here. So there's a journalist whose name is Alex Berenson, formerly wrote for the New York Times, and found himself deplatformed from Twitter over stuff he was posting around COVID vaccines and stuff like that about 18 months ago. Now, he actually took Twitter to court because he had had conversations in the year prior with an executive at Twitter who had assured him that they wanted people to have opinions that were out of the mainstream and that was not something that was going to get him banned. And so he found himself in a unique situation to actually force Twitter to reinstate him through the legal system. And in part, they did that to avoid discovery, which would have then forced them to reveal internal communications about it. Now, the relevant part here is that what the judge found in choosing to allow this to go forward was that if Twitter as a private business had no policy and simply said, hey, we don't like that guy and we have no policy, so we can kick him off because we have no policy and that's our policy, then that would have been fine. But instead, by instituting a 5-strike policy about COVID misinformation, where they had specific rules about what was and wasn't allowed and what would constitute strikes, by nature of setting those rules out in place, they actually set contractual terms in place that changed how a user could interact with them. And so by nature of setting those standards, they didn't have to set any standards, but by nature of setting them, they had to abide by them, or they were actually in breach of contract with the person who was using their service. Now, this strikes me as very, very similar to what we're talking about here with Mailchimp. If Mailchimp or any other company actually out there has policies that are on the books, and then they use those as a pretense for banning someone or kicking someone off their service, but they didn't actually violate the rules, it seems to me that the Alex Berenson case that we've just seen concluded really does represent a kind of opening to go after them for breach of contract terms rather than under the very difficult Section 230 rules that we've seen such failures against.